What's up, Mehran? How's it going, man?
Hey Reza, good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, thanks. It's been a busy week, I'm sure, for you as well. But thank you very much for joining, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about blockchain with you. I've been doing it for a long time, and right now that I'm doing it for UNICEF and the UN, I think there's a lot of tricky things that today will kind of decompose and make it easier to understand. So I'm excited for that.
For sure, for sure. So for those who are listening, can you tell us a little about yourself, your background, where you came from?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm a University of Toronto electrical engineering grad. I finished school around 2015, and I joined a consulting company after that called Deloitte. In my journey at Deloitte, I made myself, or I found myself eventually working on Deloitte's blockchain team. And while I was there, we helped large enterprises and different organizations like public sector organizations to trade finance and supply chain organizations understand what blockchain is and how they can apply it to their businesses. So I did that for a few years. While I was there, I was doing both strategy and implementation work. So I was leading multiple technical teams to build websites or mobile applications that would use front-end frameworks that we're all familiar with, but then have those websites sit on top of blockchain platforms. And after doing that for a few years, I then moved to UNICEF. So UNICEF is a UN agency that focuses on children emergencies around the world. And they were exploring cryptocurrencies since 2015, but not with a dedicated focus. So when I joined in 2019, we started dedicating 2 or 3 resources within the Office of Innovation to just explore blockchain and cryptocurrency. And that's where I am right now.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a ton of questions, and I can start, all over the place. But before any of that, for those listening, can you give us a brief, kind of elevator pitch of what blockchain really is and what it's intended for?
Yeah, of course. So blockchain, it's a very tricky technology because it combines a lot of different technologies together. But when you kind of distill it down to what it actually does, it's a way for people to store information. So you can think of it as a database, but the difference here is instead of one person or one party hosting the database and being responsible for all the data, the idea is there's going to be multiple parties that are maintaining a copy of that database or the information that needs to be managed. The way that I explain it, I think makes the most sense. If you think of a game of hockey, for example, in the NHL, the National Hockey League, if there's a bunch of people playing the sport, so let's say there's 2 teams of 5, there's the referees and the players, and every time someone scores, there's usually a goal counter or goalkeeper or something that's keeping track of the score, right? And so if you apply that to databases, the idea is the goalkeeper is acting as a database. So whenever the players or the referees or whomever is interested in the score, they would refer to the goalkeeper and then they're like, hey, what's the score? And the goalkeeper, that single entity, would tell the players or whomever this is what the score is. With blockchain, the idea is you remove the goalkeeper. And so now there is no centralized person or party responsible for keeping track of the score. And so what will happen instead is the people that are playing the game or the referees that are part of the game are all keeping track of the score in their head instead, because they no longer have the need or the ability to rely on someone that's keeping track of this information. And so in this scenario, let's say there's 10 players, 3 or 4 referees. There's 14 people, for example, that are keeping track of the score in their head. Now, the reason why blockchain is so interesting and powerful to people is if somebody in that game, for example, lies about the score, all the other players and the referees will tell that person, hey, you're wrong, the score is actually this. Right? And so whatever the majority of the players or the network or the platform agrees on as like, this is the correct information, that's what will be known as the truth. And so that's blockchain in like layman's terms, I think, to the average Canadian is how I would go about it.
Yeah, especially with that hockey reference, for
Yeah.
sure. So you said that it's a database, and it's not
Mhm.
one single person who owns this database. That's why it's called a blockchain. So there's a chain of people who are overlooking the integrity of this database, for example, right?
No, so that's a little bit different. I would say the blockchain itself. Um, think about it like this. So think of an Excel file.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everyone that's playing the game or maintaining the blockchain has an Excel file.
Mm-hmm.
Each row is a block.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then the blocks are all tied together, and that's kind of where the chain comes into play. So imagine like this Excel file that everyone has. The every time you add a row to this Excel file, it's somehow linked to the row before,
Hmm.
and so blockchains work in a similar way.
Interesting. And okay, so you mentioned something about the fact that, it's, I mean, it's decentralized. So one single person doesn't own the entire database. But let's say in the context of something like Bitcoin, right? Um,
Yeah.
what happens if one person purchases a lot of Bitcoins and eventually owns, let's say, 40, 50% of that entire portfolio of crypto? Is it still decentralized, or it can't be called decentralized anymore?
Mhm. That's a great question. So blockchain is a technology, and Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that is applied blockchain technology. And so the way to think about it is, so again, we have this Excel file that everyone's maintaining in this blockchain network. And in this Excel file, the entries are Bitcoin transactions. So Reza, imagine you have some Bitcoin, you send it to me, that would be added to the Excel file. And when it gets added to one Excel file, everyone else has to add it as well, okay? Now, the cryptocurrency part, which is digital currency, that is agnostic from how the Excel file is maintained or the database that everyone has is maintained. So um, so if I have a lot of Bitcoin, the only thing that would appear on everyone's computer that's managing the Bitcoin blockchain is like, oh, Mehran has a lot of Bitcoin or Reza has this much Bitcoin. But that doesn't correlate with like how much control I have over the network. The
Uh,
way to think about it is, yeah, instead, I think what can be concerning, and this isn't an issue now, but it can be, but it gets very expensive to do this. Imagine you had like hundreds of thousands of computers all running the Bitcoin software, which is the thing that's maintaining the Bitcoin database. But imagine like one party controls a lot of those computers.
hmm.
Yeah. So there are people that are maintaining the Bitcoin blockchain. What they've done is they've bought a lot of server space on Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, or they've actually gone to a place where there's a lot of land. They've bought land. They've created a bunch of computers that are like, or not, yeah, I guess like created or put together a bunch of computers that are optimized to maintain the Bitcoin blockchain.
Hmm.
And so what happens now is every time people are sending transactions, there's like probably a handful of parties that control, what gets added and not gets added. Um, these handful of parties don't, I guess, collude with each other, but they do own large parts of the network. I think the biggest network owner for the Bitcoin blockchain right now has about 20 to 30% of,
20
I
to
guess,
30%.
control of the network. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm going to minimize this area of our conversation. I want to kind of dive into some of the work that you've done. And then once our conversation is built up, I have a few more questions around this. So I'll just minimize this and uh, focus more on the implementation of blockchain in the context of your work, because you said you were in Deloitte, and it was mostly B2B uh, development and
Mhm.
work that you did, I assume, right? So I wanted to know how you implemented blockchain for different businesses when you were working with Deloitte.
Sure. So at Deloitte, we work with a lot of enterprise companies, and They're interested in blockchain because it introduces the ability to share information in a new way, right? So some of the applications that we applied it to were in the finance sector, in the supply chain sector, and a lot of these sectors, they have multiple groups of, or yeah, multiple organizations working together to fulfill some kind of process, right? So I think the easiest one to explain is supply chain. There's usually a producer. Producer then has to ship whatever they're creating to a manufacturer. The manufacturer will do some kind of processing, and then they'll give it to a retailer, and then the retailer gives it to the consumer. And so for each level of this supply chain, there's probably like 10 different producers making one good, 10 different manufacturers competing to buy and sell that good. And then there's a ton of retailers that are also going to make it available for the consumer. And because there's so many parties involved, all of them are right now managing their own data. So, company A has their own database, company B has their own database. And so a lot of information gets lost in the process when it goes, when a good goes from producer to the retailer. And so because there's a lot of waste and inefficiency in how they're currently managing their data, a lot of these enterprise companies were thinking like, can we leverage something like the Bitcoin blockchain or something like the Ethereum blockchain, where our information isn't completely public, but we at least are able to share it with our colleagues without compromising like private competitive data. And so 2-3 years ago, when I was working with a lot of these companies, they wanted to take like not public platforms, but have platforms be open enough so that they can at least share with their colleagues and competitors.
Interesting. So I was gonna ask what sort of challenges does blockchain development address in the context of supply chain that you were talking about, and is the answer data integrity and data management? Is that the main thing that blockchain is kind of filling in?
Yeah, and also with data availability. So a lot of the times things get lost in translation between shipper and supplier, or producer and manufacturer. And so a lot of these people were like, oh, let's just put all of our data into this platform and kind of permission it in such a way so that everyone has the data that they need. And they were relying on, so blockchain also has a layer of cryptography and privacy enabling technologies or components that they can leverage. And so they're all thinking of ways to apply that to whatever they were building so that they can share more confidently.
Right. And is this a similar case, let's say in the fintech industry? Is blockchain addressing the same challenges it did in the supply chain industry, in the fintech industry as well?
So there's two realms of blockchain being applied in the finance and technology area. So one is through existing financial services providers. So banks, for example, they are looking at blockchain in one lens, and then there's another community that's looking at it without an institution. And so they're building open source software that is just creating this open financial network. So the first one, when banks, for example, or governments are looking at blockchain and thinking of ways to apply blockchain and cryptocurrencies to some of the services that are already available in the banking industry, they're looking at ways to issue currency to everyone through these digital technologies. So right now, the dollar, for example, is backed by some asset. Governments should only be able to create as many dollars as much as assets that they have in the bank to back that dollar up. And then I think a few decades ago, they've removed that standard. So initially, when you were issuing like the US dollar, for example, the banks had to have gold in their banks to issue the US dollar against. But now they haven't, right? Like they removed that principle. And so now people are just printing money based on, I guess, needs, for example. And so, when you have recessions and you have airlines industries collapsing or banking industries collapsing, the banks are no longer tied to be like, oh, we actually don't have the gold in our bank account, so we can't issue money to like actually being able to issue a lot of money. And so, they're interested in cryptocurrencies because they're looking at these new infrastructures that are coming up, and they're like, okay, here is money that's backed by some algorithm or technology that's more fair, right? You can't just create money out of thin air kind of thing. And so they're looking at how they would translate the existing monetary system to something like in the crypto world. And then when they do that, that also enables them to explore, I think, cross-border banking more efficiently as well. Because right now there are a lot of challenges in the foreign exchange market and I guess settling balances from business A to business B when they're in different countries, because there's usually like multiple banks involved. So streamlining a lot of these processes is kind of one area that cryptocurrency is being applied from the banking and government perspective.
Right. So a couple of questions here. I thought, and I think this is kind of the general sentiment that people have who don't know a lot about blockchain, is that this is fundamentally disrupting the banking industry and they're not happy with it. But then based on what you're saying, they actually can leverage this to improve their operations and their processes, right?
Yeah, and so there are ways. So this is like one track that a lot of people are exploring blockchain. It's like how can we create policies and rules and technology that leverages a lot of the stuff that's happening in the open source software world to the existing system. I think a lot of the rumors that we're hearing that blockchain is disrupting things completely is through the innovation that's happening in the open source world. And so the other area of fintech that is being explored is, so there's a blockchain called the Ethereum blockchain. They introduced this notion of very easily being able to write code that everyone can have access to. And some of the things that they're implementing are in the fintech space, and what they're implementing are basic financial services for anyone that has the internet. Right. So I don't think we notice this challenge a lot in North America, because we can walk into any bank, open a bank account, tell them you want to save and get a little bit of return on the money that we save with the bank. And so that kind of service that's available to people in North America is not readily available to certain other places around the world. And so a lot of the innovation that's happening is like if you have money, if you have crypto, you can use the code or the smart contracts that people are uploading to the Ethereum blockchain to perform basic financial services. And so what's happening is, instead of people, so I think the disruptive part of this is, instead of people going to their country's banks or country's governments to manage their money, they're now relying on this new world where the internet is doing a lot of the services that they expected banks to do, but are not doing.
Right. Okay. So then to that end, there is a lot of industries that, blockchain is being implemented in, and, two of them that we spoke about, fintech, supply chain. But then what do you think the future of this is going to look like? Do you think that this will hold up and continue to develop, or is this something that, might decline soon and people might not use it? What are your thoughts on that, like the future of blockchain?
So I think that technology is here to stay. The ability to share data between people you don't trust in a way that's like transparent for everyone to see, in a way that's trustworthy, right? So if I send money to someone and this software tells me that this incident happened, and I can't refute that, because everyone's kind of like the technology of blockchain allows people to be like, no, here's a transaction, we did send that money, you can't really do anything about it. And so instead of having to rely on centralized institutions to do that, like, I think the wow factor for that is here to stay, right? So these open permissionless networks that anyone can interact on, whether it's to move money around or to move data or whatever around, I think they're here to stay. Now, I think the bigger question is, are things going to be completely permissionless and decentralized, or is there going to be some in between where institutions like banks and governments have a role to play, when people can really just upload whatever code they want to perform whatever functions they want, reducing the need for these institutions, right? So like, where is the line going to be drawn? I think that's a bigger question. I mean, it's possible. It's possible to have something that's completely permissionless. Like if I need any function that a bank needs to provide, I can access it on the internet cheaper, faster, and more efficiently. Like, why wouldn't I use that, right? Like that's kind of the question there.
Yeah, it does. It does create a lot of. I mean, not sure if this is the right analogy, but when we talk about, let's say, a state, and then we say a state can be self-governing and we can allow the market to play out, we don't need any government intervention. That includes, let's say, policing, right? Not sure like how that would play out. And then to a similar end, if all of these institutions are, let's say, gone and everything is decentralized, do you think this would be sustainable in the long run without having any sort of security measures or policy around it?
So policies are being developed, right? So I think there's going to be an interesting debate between policymakers and this notion of code is law as well, right? These blockchain platforms have introduced the ability for like anyone to write any code and anybody can interact on it, right? Whether you're in Canada or the US, or I don't know, Bangladesh, that's where my parents are from. It doesn't matter, like we'll all have access to the same software, right? Now, if the rules in Canada say that, you know, Mehran, you can't use this, like the blockchain platforms are persistent enough and permanent enough where like, I can be like, oh, okay, but what are you gonna do about it? And still use the technology, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're decentralized, because like there are people that are willing to have these networks stay in place. It's going to be a very tricky battle for anyone to try to shut down the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain. And so I think what we'll see is these governments try to adapt to these technologies because I think they're going to understand that they're not going anywhere. Let's try to at least create some regulation or policies around it so that we don't get completely blindsided by the potential of this technology.
Right, that makes sense. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know you're not like an investor and you won't give official investing advice, but in terms of investing in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and all other sorts of cryptocurrency, as well as blockchain technologies, do you think that right now is a good time to get into these sorts of things, or is it too risky? Is it too volatile? I mean, it is volatile, but what are your thoughts on it in general?
So from an investment side of things, my personal strategy is very, what's the word? Conservative, I would say. I would just say like for the past few years, I have a weekly buy for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I just buy the same amount every week. And I don't look at the price. I just know like in 10, 20, 30 years, like this is an asset that I would like to have. And so those are the two that I buy every week.
I see. Okay, so yeah, you are expecting this, like you said, to last, be sustainable, and obviously their value increasing in the long run, or at least that's your perception.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of kind of interesting things here. So right now, I think the entire world is denominated in the US dollar, right? So one of my beliefs is that may change at some point, and if there is a competing currency right now that the world is going to develop like the standard on, this new monetary policy on, I think Bitcoin is a pretty good competitor to the US dollar. And so instead of things being denominated in the US dollar, I think things eventually will be denominated in Bitcoin because it's a currency that it's been proven for the last decade, right? Like people are using it. It tackles a lot of the core issues around digital currency, and it's an asset that's scarce and you can't manipulate the supply, right? And so I think that'll be an interesting kind of thing to happen. The other interesting area, so Bitcoin is one side of things. On the Ethereum side of things, I think the ability to implement code that anybody has access to do things like basic banking is very powerful. And the Ethereum blockchain itself also runs on a cryptocurrency called Ether, which is the native token for the Ethereum blockchain. And all the transactions that are currently happening on the Ethereum blockchain are powered by that asset. And so, my career is in the cryptocurrency space, and so I'm thinking like if like my bet is Ether and Bitcoin industries will evolve and grow, and more people will adopt it going forward. And so that'll make the demand and need for the two assets that I invest in like more lucrative, I guess. So
Right, right. That's interesting. So, you know, you said that your career is in blockchain, right? So one of the things that I was curious to know as well is one simple use case that you've worked on. I know we touched upon supply chain and the fintech industry, but
mhm.
what's really hazy to me is when someone says blockchain development, is this the same as software development, just in a different context? How does it work? You know, what does that mean really?
Yeah, so if we're talking about blockchain development from a software perspective, so yes, when you build blockchain apps, you're building software. And um, as I mentioned, blockchain is like a database, right? And so in the database, you can store currency, but you can also store data. And if you think about web applications and mobile applications right now, there's the front end component, right? So the front end component is what you open on Google Chrome or what you open on your phone and you interact with. When you are interacting with these user interfaces, you're sending requests to a database.
Mhm.
The database has a bunch of information that gets manipulated and then shows up on your screen. Blockchain development is very similar. So there is the backend component where the data sits, the logic sits, and then there's typically a website or a mobile application that sits on top of the blockchain that you can make requests or changes through.
I see. Okay. Okay. That's good to know. I was kind of confused in the beginning because I didn't necessarily know, like, is it a specific language or not? But I assume you can develop blockchain technology on, let's say, Python as well, right?
Yeah, so I guess blockchain development is a very broad term. So there's existing platforms like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And from a user perspective, all I want to do is read information from those blockchains or write information to those blockchains. So there are interfaces that are available for me to work with to have my front-end website or mobile application write and read information from those blockchains, right? So that is one type of blockchain development. The other type of blockchain development is actually developing a blockchain from scratch. It's the same as writing a database from scratch. So if you were to write software that would hold data, how would you do that with, or like you would apply similar principles for writing your own blockchain? Yeah. But I think the majority of blockchain development right now is leveraging existing blockchain platforms and writing interfaces from a front-end application to the data side of Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Mm. And if someone were to want to know more about blockchain and about cryptocurrencies and about the development of these sorts of technologies, do you have any specific kind of resources in mind to refer to us?
Yeah, I mean, Investopedia has a lot of good resources. Investopedia.org, I think they kind of break down the cryptocurrency and blockchain space from a business perspective. I think that's very valuable. So for a lot of the people that are interested in these technologies, I usually send them there first. And then it depends on what you want to do with the technology, right? So if you're looking for like the bleeding edge innovation stuff, there's a few projects that I can refer you to that kind of refer to like, here are the big things that are being created. Most of the innovation that's happening in the blockchain space right now, I would say, is in the decentralized finance space. Like that's what's taking a lot of the interest of the blockchain community right now, because these a lot of these projects that are coming out, people are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, not from like a VC startup perspective, but like people are actually using these protocols to do savings or do lending and all that kind of stuff without a bank, right? And so there's a website, it's called DeFi Pulse. It's a DeFi Pulse. DeFi stands for decentralized finance. And then the Pulse is like, you have a pulse on decentralized finance. And it actually lists the use cases that are prevalent in this ecosystem. It also shows you how the industry is growing. And so yeah, so that's two. There's a bunch of Twitter followers that I think you would get a lot of the new information as well. But I think the Investopedia and DeFi Pulse are pretty good places to start. There's a lot of like one-on-one information out there as well. Like Coinbase, Binance, all of these big exchanges have developed a lot of material.
Right.
So those are good places to start as well.
Okay, no, I appreciate it. I'll definitely take a look and leave a link in for anyone else who's interested as well. And I got one more thing I wanted to ask you. You talked about Binance and Coinbase.
Sure.
If someone wanted to invest in cryptocurrencies, do you think Binance is a good option for starting, like for Canadians mainly?
Yeah, I have a Binance account, but I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it. So it's kind of like a two things, right? So the first thing is companies like Coinbase and Binance, they have created a centralized organization to facilitate the buying and selling of cryptocurrency, which counteracts the whole purpose of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, where you shouldn't need someone like Coinbase or Binance to get access to your money. But given that we're in this early stage where employers are not paying people in crypto, it's not easy to go to an ATM and exchange US dollar or Canadian dollar for Bitcoin and Ether. I think Coinbase and Binance are good options to help people do that. Once you actually acquire the asset, I think it's important for people to look into non-custodial wallets. And so these are blockchain accounts on the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchain that don't rely on institutions like Binance and Coinbase. So that's kind of the non-custodial part of it. So custodial services are Binance and Coinbase, and then non-custodial services also exist. Just to name a few, there's Lightning Wallet, or not Lightning, Blue Wallet for the Bitcoin blockchain, for example. There's MetaMask for the Ethereum blockchain. And essentially, like, there's a username and password kind of mechanism for these blockchains. And as long as you have those, you'll always have access to your money, right? Whereas if Coinbase or Binance shuts down and your crypto is on those services, then your money gets stuck there.
Okay, so you can transfer your investments from Coinbase or Binance onto these non-custodial wallets, right?
Exactly. That would be my recommendation. The whole thing, there's a notion in crypto, not your keys, not your crypto.
Right.
Yeah, there's actually, and the keys referring to your password. There was actually a huge scandal a few years ago where there was a Canadian exchange. They had a lot of people, like, people used them for like 1 or 2 years, and then all of a sudden the founders went missing. And with the missing founder, the keys to everyone's accounts also went missing. And I think there's like $200 million that were lost indefinitely because of that incident. They said that the founder passed away or something, and that person was the only person that had access to everyone's passwords, and then everyone's money got locked up. And there's actually a lawsuit right now, and I think the lawsuit is still ongoing for people trying to get their money back from that Canadian exchange.
Interesting. So guys, make sure you get your non-custodial wallets at those two places that Mehran was talking about as well. Mehran, we're at around the 35-minute mark. I just wanted to say it's really been a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate, the insights, the information, all your experiences. If there's anything else that you want to share, I'd be happy to listen.
Yeah, of course. Reza, thank you for having me. I know this conversation seems very disjointed. I think the blockchain space is very big. And so when a lot of people approach it, they're just like, there's a lot of information out there. And I think this conversation kind of shows to that, right? There's the enterprise side of things. There's the blockchain for public kind of thing. There's an investment portion. So all of these areas are so big. I don't think a 35-minute conversation does it justice. So that being said, I think stay curious, stay hungry. I think the few resources that I shared today are plenty to start with. And then you can find me on Twitter. This is my first name and last name together. And if you want to kind of figure out what to do next after exploring some of the things I shared, I'm happy to follow on those conversations too.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely circle back with more specific questions and case studies so we can dive into. Really would be happy to, gain more of your insights. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Merhan. Bye-bye.